Dear listener, the Indian Law Institute is glad to be given a platform where we could interact with students. We hope to be able to give you a brief and interesting overview of the Constitution of India and the fundamental duties enumerated under our Constitution. We often hear of our rights in terms of what the state owes to us, the people. But our duties, what we owe to ourselves and fellow people, are hardly discussed. In this introductory commentary, we'll make an attempt to familiarize you with these missing premises, what we as citizens are bound to abide by under our Constitution. Let us begin by examining the Constitution in brief. Constitution can be termed as the backbone of the state and its structure. All the systems, including the state, derive its legitimacy from the Constitution. It is the foundation of all other laws of a country. It contains the rights and duties of the individuals, the powers and duties of the state, and declares the political and social code of the country. Before we move to the conceptual parts, we'll give you some basic facts about our Constitution. Adopted by the Constituent Assembly on 26 November 1949, our Constitution came into force on 26th of January 1950, repealing the Indian Independence Act of 1947 and the Government of India Act of 1935. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was the chairperson of the drafting committee. The Indian Constitution is the world's lengthiest written constitution and has a preamble, 395 articles in 22 parts and 12 schedules. It has been amended 103 times, the latest being the 103rd Amendment on providing reservation for economically weaker sections of citizens. The preamble may be regarded as the heart of the Constitution, the key to the mind of the makers of the Constitution. The preamble lists out the most important principles of the Constitution, based on which the rest of the document proceeds. Primarily, it mandates that we, the people, are the collective sovereign, having given to ourselves this Constitution. It also lays down that India is sovereign, socialist, secular, and democratic, and strives to secure justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity to all its citizens. Now, let us examine the conceptual aspects, what our Constitution is, what its spirit and meaning are. The Indian Constitution is not a command that was passed down to us by an external entity. On the other hand, it is that document which emanated from the collective will of the people, in the sense that we, the people, gave to ourselves this Constitution. It is the sacrosanct text upon which our democracy is founded, and it is to its mandates that we owe our allegiance. In simpler terms, it is our own mandate that we follow when we respect the Constitution, and it is we, the people, who rule over ourselves through the state. In adhering to the Constitution, we respect those ideals that we adopted for ourselves, and this realization is necessary to inculcate respect for our constitutional values. It is hence essential for all persons to have a basic understanding of the Constitution so as to appreciate the foundation on which the state functions. It helps us understand the foundational principles of our democracy, to help us follow them, and to ensure that the state functions in tandem with these mandates. In India, the Constitution is supreme and no law or policy should derogate its principles, and neither should we, the people, act contrary to the Constitution. At the same time, it is important to note that it is not merely a technical document meant to be interpreted to suit contexts at hand, but is a living document that evolves and grows with changing social conditions. It does not imply that the Constitution can be altered to suit the necessities felt by those in power, but that the underlying spirit of our Constitution is capable of adapting to changes in social conditions. The Constitution of India maintains a balance between rigidity and flexibility. While the Constitution gives us the right to demand that the state abide by its norms, it also casts upon us a corresponding duty to ensure that our democracy stays strong and firm. Having discussed what a constitution is, let us move on to examine what constitutional law is. Constitutional law is a body of rules, doctrines and guidelines laid down by way of interpretations of the constitutional codes of a country and the opinion of jurists about how to understand, read and apply the constitution. These interpretations effectuate the flexibility of the Constitution. As new circumstances arise, which were not directly addressed or foreseen by the Constituent Assembly at the time of drafting, the courts and jurists apply the existing principles and values of the Constitution to answer the situation at hand. This keeps the document growing and living through time. The Constitution can also be amended by the legislature following the mode laid down in the document itself. Our Constitution came into being after intense discussions and debates held in the Constituent Assembly, where the members spent time deciding on what provisions to add, what phrases to use, and what concerns to address. In examining the Constitution at a deeper level, it is important to go through the texts of Constituent Assembly debates, which lay down the notions, objections, and speeches of all members in detail throughout the Assembly, since it gives us a peek into the intention of the drafters when adopting individual articles. Perhaps you wonder why study the Constitution. We can answer that as well. It is imperative for all the citizens of India, not just law students, to attain at least a basic knowledge of the provisions of the Constitution of India for several reasons. It helps you familiarize with the foundational principles on which our democracy is based. It would help your wholesome intellectual development by urging you to think and apply these guiding principles. It also helps you to attain knowledge of your rights and duties. It pushes you to be in harmony with the goals and objectives of the country. And it helps you to be effective contributors in the nation-building process. Now that you have a basic idea of our Constitution, let's proceed to our focal area, fundamental duties. As the name suggests, these duties are fundamental in nature, meaning thereby that they reflect the basic expectations that the society has from its members. This was not a part of the original text of the Constitution and was introduced in the form of an addition, Article 51A, in the year 1976. This was done by way of the 42nd Amendment to the Constitution. The duties cast upon citizens can be seen as a corollary to the power vested in people as the collective sovereign. We owe responsibilities to the system that we have established for ourselves, and we too need to abide by certain norms to ensure that the system functions well. We confer powers upon the state, and we are also accountable to the system that functions for our benefit. Unlike the fundamental rights, the duties are not enforceable on the people, meaning that one cannot approach a court of law to mandate that we fulfill these duties. However, the spirit of the Constitution requires us to live up to these with the vigor and realization that these are duties we owe to ourselves and fellow people. Let us now proceed to examine each duty and try to decipher what it indeed requires of us. Article 51A says that it shall be the duty of every citizen of India, first, to abide by the Constitution and respect its ideals and institutions, the national flag and the national anthem. The Constitution entails certain ideals and principles on which the nation is founded, and all citizens are expected to abide by the same as well. As narrated earlier, the basic principles that our Constitution is founded on are democracy, socialism, secularism, justice, liberty, and fraternity. Democracy implies the rule of people and the rule of law. Socialism implies social and economic equality, including the absence of discrimination on the grounds of caste, color, creed, sex, religion, or language. Secularism in India is more in the lines of pluralism, which means that not only do we not have a state religion, but we in fact are bound to respect and recognize all the various faiths and religions. The right to personal liberty is a cluster of innumerable and ever-expanding rights that guarantee individual freedom to us in different aspects of life, like movement, faith, employment, and speech. Fraternity stands for the sense of brotherhood that we are supposed to feel for fellow people. It can be termed as a sense of empathy and compassion that urges us to speak up and act for others' rights and well-being with the same vigor with which we would for ourselves. This duty also mandates us to respect the nation's entity and its symbolic representations, the national anthem and the national flag. However, it needs to be kept in mind that mere physical manifestations of such respect would not be sufficient to fulfill this mandate. The flag entails several principles and it must be undertaken to respect these ideals in our actions. The top saffron color indicates the strength and courage of the country. The white middle band indicates peace and truth with Dharmachakra. The green shows the fertility, growth and auspiciousness of the land. The chakra intends to show that there is life in movement and death in stagnation. The national anthem resonates the unity, diversity and geographical beauty of the land and strives to instill pride in the masses. Respect for the national flag and the national anthem requires us to abide to the spirit they attempt to dispel. Sadly, the sense of respect witnessed today is limited to the physical manifestation in buying and hoisting flags, posting patriotism on social media especially twice a year, and standing erect when the national anthem is played, which is, however, not sufficient to fulfill the mandate of this article. True respect for the national flag implies we need to respect the values that it upholds, to carry forward the strength and courage that created India from the colonial regime, to promote peace and truth, to sustain and improve the prosperity and auspiciousness of the land, and to move forward in development. True respect for our national anthem requires us to respect the diversity and maintain the unity in we, the people. The second duty asks us to cherish and follow the noble ideals which inspired our national struggle for freedom. The ideals that inspired our national struggle for freedom were majorly founded on the need to be free from colonial rule, to be unified in ousting the external command that reduced us to inferiors in our own land, and to replace the authoritarian regime with people's rule. Though the earliest instances of revolt saw bloody attacks and aggression, the later stages were largely founded on peaceful yet firm protests. Different national leaders were in favor of different modes of protest with varying ideals among different individuals and factions. The nationalist struggle was founded on the shared bond felt by people across India, irrespective of their individual and regional differences. The bond formed from the common need felt to overcome the colonial oppressor. People began discovering their unity in the process of their struggle against colonialism, and the shared goal to achieve freedom united diverse masses. The ideals that we, hence, are bound to uphold is the ideal of unity among the people, peaceful and cooperative living, and the promise to uphold the democratic freedom that the national struggle earned for us. Upholding the ideals of freedom struggle would need us to uphold the dream of free India, where rule of law prevails and democratic principles are respected. We also need to remember that the nationalist sentiment in our freedom struggle intended to unite the diverse masses and not to propagate differences. The othering out of people would go against the spirit of unity in diversity that our freedom struggle was founded on. It is this ideal of unity in diversity and the duty to peacefully resist anti-democratic practices that we need to abide by. The third duty is to uphold and protect the sovereignty, unity and integrity of India. As related above, the sovereignty and integrity that we enjoy today was earned at a price. The price paid by those who fought and ousted the authoritarian regime and gave us a democratic state in its place. In a democracy, the people are the sovereign in principle, while collectively the people are the sovereign who control the state through the constitution made by them. Individually, the people are controlled by the state they put in power. The role that people play in maintaining the sovereignty is of utmost importance, since the collective sovereignty of the people of India can be strengthened only when individual citizens perform their duties earnestly as well. Our diversity is perhaps our most unique characteristic, and the unity within this is what we need to uphold. Unity and integrity of the nation goes way beyond declarations of patriotism, where we often think our duty ends. This article rather could be read to cast a positive duty on every citizen to ensure the well-being of fellow people. Integrity and unity of the nation is achieved from integrity and unity among its people, and that flows from our sense of belonging to this nation. Our allegiance to India is founded on our sense of belonging to this land, incredibly rich in its history, cultural heritage, and most importantly, its democratic principles. In upholding and protecting the sovereignty, unity, and integrity of India, we need to instill in ourselves and others the realization that this is our country, equally belonging to each one of its diverse peoples. Our unity and integrity has to be ensured by dispelling the factors that threaten the unity of the people, the ideals that differentiate between fellow people. Unity of India has to be ensured by observing our allegiance to the fellow people and in ensuring their best interests. Fourth duty is to defend the country and render national service when called upon to do so. India's freedom from the authoritarian regime was fought with the participation of lakhs and lakhs of people rendering services fit to their capabilities. To defend the country need not be limited to the protection of its physical entity, but could be extended to the upholding of the democratic and constitutional principles on which our nation is founded. Defending the country also entails defending the people from anti-democratic practices, protecting the people from violation of their rights, and securing to the people their liberties as laid down in the Constitution. Similarly, rendering services for the nation could include services like education and healthcare, services meant to uplift the quality of life of the people. For it is service to the people that constitutes service to the nation. This duty ought not to be seen in the limited sense of our duties in countering external threats, but must be regarded as a continuing and perpetual obligation that pushes us to defend the democratic principles and to do our part in ensuring that the state functions on those principles. Fifth, to promote harmony and the spirit of common brotherhood amongst all the people of India, transcending religious, linguistic, and regional or sectional diversities, to renounce practices derogatory to the dignity of women. As highlighted earlier, India is home to a wide diversity of people, and the common sense of equal entitlement of all to this land and its resources has to be respected by all. With the variety of religions, languages, regions, social and cultural sections, there remains a danger that some of us may inadvertently get othered out, especially by those of us with majoritarian power. The spirit of common brotherhood and harmony requires us to keep a check on ourselves, to ensure that our actions or inactions do not bear any danger to the harmony among people of this land. This article also asks us to renounce practices that are derogatory to women, and this bears great relevance in our society that is constantly plagued with cultural and social practices that are derogatory to women. Some of these notions are so intrinsically drilled into our minds, we have normalized them to such a deep extent that any suggestion of change in these would seem ridiculous and outrageous. Any challenge to certain practices that we have taken for granted. However, to satisfy this mandate, it is essential to work towards eliminating such practices, to cultivate respect for a woman's personhood, and to strive to create equal spaces and opportunities for women. Sixth, to value and preserve the rich heritage of our composite culture. India is home to diversity at all fronts: geographical terrains, cultural practices, regional cuisines, historical influx, religious and social identities, festivals, environment and biodiversity. From the remains of the Indus Valley civilization to the temples of South India, the mausoleums and gardens of the Mughals, the palaces and monuments of erstwhile emperors, the Ajanta and Ellora, the statues and paintings, to the numerous cultures and traditions practiced by communities across the country. India has a history that transcends thousands of years. Apart from that, several communities and regional groups have preserved and furthered these practices down through generations, and it can be witnessed in different forms across India. From handloom to pottery to food to caricature to medicine to indigenous practices to annual regional festivals linked to occasions like harvest, the diverse ways in which people celebrate and propagate our culture is incredible. Respect for our cultural heritage implies that we appreciate that India is an amalgamation of all its diversity, and its preservation is our collective duty. To fulfill this mandate, it is not enough to carry the word and pride, but We need to take positive steps to ensure that these are not lost in our fast march towards modernity. Preserving the cultural relics need not only be the participation of the government, but also a collective consciousness in people that these monuments and artifacts depict our history, and we must strive to protect and preserve them. Our duty also does not stop at the preservation of relics. It extends to the protection of cultural practices and ethnic identities as well that carry forth this culture. Preservation of the land, environment, and other factors that are essentially linked with cultural identities also need to be preserved to afford protection to their heritage. Factors like these that are ancillary to the preservation of heritage and culture must also be accorded attention under the mandate of this article. 7th, to protect and improve the natural environment including forests, lakes, rivers and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. India has rich biodiversity and environment, but we have not done a good job in preserving it well. We have been so bad that the courts, the government and social activists have often had to step up and push for measures to protect environment and wildlife. Our sense of entitlement over the environment around us is so overwhelming that we never take a moment to realize that natural spaces are in fact shared spaces, belonging just as much to other living creatures as they do to us. Protection of forests, natural habitats, and compassion for animals need to stem from not only the notion of how the environment is essential to sustain human life, but also from the basic understanding that nature does not exclusively belong to human species. It is not ours to exploit to the exclusion of other living creatures. Active efforts need to be taken to undo the harms we have caused so far and to refrain from deteriorating it further. The rising air, water and noise pollution and large-scale denudation of forest continue to cause irreversible harm to all forms of life on earth. The mindless and wanton deforestation on various pretexts cause havoc also in the form of natural calamities and imbalances. By protecting our forest cover, planting new trees, cleaning rivers, conserving water resources, reforesting wastelands, hills and mountains, and controlling pollution in cities, villages and industrial units, we can help save the environment to some extent. We need to put in place concerted and strategic efforts to move forward through voluntary citizen initiatives. These need to be complementary with governmental initiatives to bring about a pollution-free atmosphere. We need to realize that we have borrowed the environment from the future rather than merely inheriting it from the past. The eighth duty is to develop scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform. This duty became important in the backdrop of the superstitious beliefs and practices that plagued our society over decades. Scientific temper means outlook founded on organized knowledge and experience. Scientific temper is based on reason and rationality in contradistinction to superstition or blind faith. Scientific temper discards obsolete learning. It requires thirst for knowledge, an urge for research, for facts, and a zeal for setting things right. Humanism is primarily rational, coupled with emotional quality. It is a rationalist outlook in a system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine or supernatural matters. Though we have come quite a long way from the era where superstitions led social beliefs, and India has seen great scientific developments and has produced several major scientific minds, this provision still holds relevance. The development of science and humanism has not been uniform in the society, and the progress has been limited to certain sections only. The term scientific temper was first used in India by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru in 1946. After he became the first Prime Minister of independent India in 1947, Pandit Nehru expanded the notion of scientific temper and strived to convince the political and scientific leadership to inculcate scientific temper among our citizens. Though the term scientific temper was not in use prior to this, a number of social reformers, scholars and scientists had been advocating the need to instill a sense of scientific inquiry in the society. As a developing country, it is essential for us to follow our curiosities, seek out information, and attempt to find scientific solutions to issues around us. The spirit of inquiry and a quest to reform what needs to be reformed has to be inculcated in our minds so as to promote true development in society. Scientific temper need not be limited to areas of conventional science of laboratories and experiments, but must be seen in its wider sense to include social sciences as well. Our culture of education also could be seen in a different light to promote the spirit of inquiry and learning in young minds, inspiring you to think, analyze, and develop the requisite curiosity to seek answers in the world around you. This would promote a learning spirit that emanates from your own mind and would in turn help to build a society that strives to learn more and further existing knowledge. The ninth duty is to safeguard public property and to abjure violence. The major part of our freedom struggle was founded on the principles of peace and non-violence, and it is essential for the citizens to maintain those notions as an integral part of our life. However, peaceful protests have become a rarity in contemporary India. Public property is the first casualty in most public protests. Buses and buildings are destroyed, sometimes followed by loot and arson. We often come across acts of rampant violence against people and property, sometimes isolated sudden instances, and sometimes systematic perpetration of targeted violence against certain people and groups. Not only do these acts constitute a violation of legal and social order, but it also violates the constitutional mandate to abjure violence. India being a democracy, the institutions and property under the state in fact belong to us, the people. Destruction of public property during protests and demonstrations in fact deprive ourselves and fellow people of valuable property that belongs to us collectively. Peaceful protests and resistance is a characteristic of a strong democracy, and it brings public concerns to the forefront in a well-manifested manner. It also gives a collective voice to people and brings important issues to the authorities' attention. However, all the advantages of such demonstrations are rendered futile if the people take to violence. To have the voice of dissent heard and to adequately draw attention to injustice, we as people need to evolve protests founded within the principles of peaceful resistance and protest. Our ultimate objective must be founded on principles of democracy, and maintenance of peace would in turn accord legitimacy to the dissent as well. As observed above, our nationalist struggle also concerned public demonstrations and protest movements, but peace and non-violence were defining characteristics of those. The duty to preserve peace and secure public property is a duty that we owe to ourselves and other people, and this needs to be engraved thoroughly into our minds. Equally important is the duty to refrain from violence against persons or groups for reasons whatsoever. This duty needs to be read in the light of increasing instances of public violence against individuals on various pretexts with underlying notions of communal hatred. Numerous instances have popped up across the country where severe violence, even causing death, was unleashed on unarmed and defenseless people on allegations of theft, cow slaughter, witchcraft, child abduction, or even pursuant to escalated personal or group scuffles. The laws of the land form a part of the people's agreement to have faith in the state to prosecute and punish any wrongdoers. And in corollary to this, we as people have no right whatsoever to punish or harm any person, no matter how gruesome an act we may believe they have committed. We as citizens need to imbibe into our minds that the state machinery and courts hold the only legitimate authority to arrest, detain, or punish any wrongdoers, and mob justice grossly violates our constitutional scheme. To foster respect to the constitutional mandate, it is essential that we reject violent tendencies and never engage in destruction of public property. Our 10th duty is to strive towards excellence in all spheres of individual and collective activity so that the nation constantly rises to higher levels of endeavor and achievement. Progress of the nation can be measured through the progress of the people. To help our country develop and move forward, we need to push our own boundaries and strive to excel in areas of interest and in duties we are supposed to fulfill. The drive for excellence in all spheres of individual and collective activity is the demand of the times and a basic requirement in a highly competitive world. This would include respect for professional obligations as well. Also, special emphasis is called in the area of collective activity. Under Article 51A of the Constitution, we all owe a duty to ourselves to strive towards excellence in all spheres of individual and collective activity so that this nation may constantly rise to higher levels of endeavor and achievement. In the march to achieve excellence, it also must be kept in mind to take along our fellow people so as not to push them behind in an individual quest to achieve the best. The progress of the nation is to be in the collective development of its diverse people as well. And since not all of us are equally placed in terms of resources and potential, our efforts must also be to help the society excel as a whole. The final and 11th duty is for who is a parent or guardian to provide opportunities for education to his child, or as the case may be, ward, between the age of 6 and 14 years. The role that education plays in shaping the future of children, thereby the society and thereby the country, is immense. Education is not merely about memorizing alphabets and numerals, but entails the larger spirit of learning, attainment of knowledge, and exposure to wider resources around the world. Education strengthens the mind and affords individuals with diverse opportunities to develop their own potential and contribute to the society. This fundamental duty mandates parents and guardians to work with the state in ensuring that every child of our country, at the very least, possesses basic school education. As the youth, this duty also implies to you that the education you receive is not a favor bestowed upon you by the state, but is also a part of the positive duty cast upon your parents or guardians and the state to provide basic education to children. We hope that you would keep this premise in mind and help in any manner that you could to promote education for children aged between 6 to 14. Having listed out the duties, we now need to examine how they would possibly be effectuated. The National Commission to Review the Working of the Constitution attempted to draw out measures to this end and came out with a consultation paper on effectuation of fundamental duties of citizens in 2001. It observed that effectuation of fundamental duties is a ladder, with elucidation and elaboration as the first step, awareness as the second, inculcation as the third, aspiration as the fourth, and implementation, performance as the fifth. Since fundamental duties speak of citizens' partnerships and initiative, colloquia and consultations on fundamental duties need to be organized by citizens' groups as well, to help us comprehend the full import of the provisions of Article 51A. As Aristotle said, the greatest of all means for ensuring the stability of the Constitution is the education of citizens in the spirit of the Constitution. Awareness is the first step to be taken in this regard, promoting information and education about fundamental duties and rights among the citizens. This needs to be undertaken complementarily by the government and the citizens together. For instance, while on the one part we bring this module of fundamental duties to you, you must on your part strive to carry this forward and educate others around you of these mandates. Awareness spreads best this way, with each person striving to pass on knowledge to at least one other, and so on. The next necessity is to inculcate in ourselves a culture to respect and abide by the Constitution and its values, to fulfill the duties enunciated in the Constitution. One of the drawbacks of our education system is how the spirit of education diluted and deteriorated to mere memorization. However, through efforts like this one, we strive to bring to you the true spirit of education and learning, promoting your intellectual development, nurturing your curiosity, and encouraging critical thinking. Once the ideals of the Constitution and fundamental duties have been brought to your mind, It is your duty as well to engage with these principles and inculcate respect for these in your actions. It also implies that you, as young citizens, strive to promote the spirit further among fellow people. Sincere and effective inculcation of fundamental duties, particularly at your generation, will automatically give rise to the third step, aspiration, to translate them into daily life. Aspiration will be followed by implementation, where you undertake to ensure that you positively attempt to fulfill the duties mandated of you under the Constitution. To conclude, the essence of the fundamental duties is in the need to respect the spirit of our Constitution, its ideals, and strive to do our own part in helping the people progress. It is this spirit that we need to remember and uphold. The constitutional principles and fundamental duties can also be related to the dream of free India as put down by Rabindranath Tagore, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. The ideal of this free India can be seen depicted in the fundamental duties as well. Our Constitution strives to create a democratic state where individuals are free, are fearless, and have access to knowledge. The white band in our national flag depicts peace and truth. The principles of unity in diversity, compassion for fellow beings, and preservation of integrity urges us to see beyond the broken fragments of land created by our domestic wars. The fundamental duty to strive for excellence and the Dharma Chakra of our national flag urges us to move forward and develop without stagnation of dead habit. The duty to develop scientific temper and humanism urges to act on reasonable premises. The idea of free India is much more than freedom from colonialism. It requires that the people of the land be free and that the rights of all be secured. In addition, fundamental duties also give us the right to insist that the constitutional principles be valued by the state as well, such that the duties also provide us the right to ensure that we are able to fulfill the duties. Such a discourse was taken in the case of L.K. Koolwal versus State of Rajasthan, where the court held that Article 51A gives a right to the citizens to move the court for the enforcement of the duty cast on the state and its instrumentalities. Therefore, fundamental duties can also be invoked and utilized in the rights discourse as well. It is to the aspiration of the free India mentioned above that we need to strive. It is for this that we must observe the duties we owe to ourselves and fellow people.